Thank you very much. I want to wish you all a very blessed Sabbath today. It's good to be with you back at Braes again. And albeit in a different setting. But it's a wonderful setting, isn't it? You know, I always say that if you're going to be displaced, make sure you're displaced into a nice place. And so I think we can safely say you have been displaced into a nice place. But what I understand, very soon you'll be going back home, is that right? Praise God, praise God. A bit like the children of Israel, taken away in captivity, and you'll be going back home very soon. Praise God for that. I want to just bring to your attention a couple of things. First of all, you may not be aware, but this year we are still running the Mission to the Cities programme, and you know that London was designated as the city for the special emphasis on evangelism. Well, this year the city that is singled out is the city of Bristol. Now, you may not be aware that Bristol is our second largest city in the South England Conference. And this year there is a special emphasis on evangelism taking place, even as I speak, down there. There are 4 churches in Bristol, 4 Adventist churches that is. And we want to pray for them. So please remember the churches, the members, and also the community of Bristol as well, that God will pour out His Spirit this year. So that many will come to a knowledge of salvation. Secondly, just to make you aware, I'm sure you're already aware, this year is a special year for the South England Conference. It is the year of our session, conference session, and this is where new officers are elected, new directors are elected, taking place 3rd to the 6th of September. And I know that this church has sent some delegates through. We have those through, and I just want you to keep the session in prayer, that God's Spirit will pervade, and that God's will be done at the conference session up there in Warwick. It's taking place in Warwick University, as it was in 2011, and we want to pray for God's Spirit to be there. Today, I want to, in the next few minutes, just look at the whole concept of the voice of God. And I want to ask the question, does God still speak to His people today? Does God still speak to His people today? I remember once I was talking to a church member, and they were saying to me, it doesn't seem fair. And I said, why doesn't it seem fair? And they said, well, why is it that we don't hear from God today? And they said that when I read my Bible, I see that people like Moses, Abraham, they heard the voice of God. God spoke to them directly, and they were able to hear, and they were able to respond to God. And they said, why doesn't God speak to us today? And they went on to say that I would love God to speak in my life because I need direction, I need to make choices, I want to make right choices, I want to make God's choices. And so I love to hear, as Moses did, as Abraham did, directions for my life, so that I may know the way to proceed. And so I ask the question again, does God still speak to His people today? I'd like us to turn to 1 Kings chapter 19, and I believe that as we look at this passage, our question will be answered. 1 Kings chapter 19. Here we see a very unusual situation. And I say it's unusual because we're looking at the prophet Elijah. Elijah is what you would call one of the greats, one of the heroes of the Bible. Someone we look up to, someone we aspire to be. Because he was a man, he was a prophet of God that did God's will. You'll remember the story of Mount Carmel, where there were 400 prophets of Baal trying to get their God to do something, but after all day nothing happened. Until Elijah stepped out. And when Elijah stepped out and prayed, God acted. And there was victory that day on Mount Carmel. God was working through Elijah to bring about a great victory for God's children. When we come to this particular chapter, we see something unusual. Because it tells us that Ahab, who was the king at that time, told Jezebel, his wife, everything Elijah had done. And how the prophets of Baal had been wiped out, all 400 of them. And it tells us that Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah. She was angry. And she said, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. Can you imagine that? In other words, Jezebel is issuing a threat to Elijah and is saying, I'm going to kill you, Elijah, for what you have done to all my prophets. How did the prophet of God respond? The prophet of God who had won that great victory on Mount Carmel. It tells us Elijah was afraid. He was afraid of this threat from this woman. He was afraid of what might happen to him. He was afraid for his life. And it tells us that he actually ran for his life. He was so scared. He didn't hide anywhere. He actually ran as far away as possible to get away from the threats of Jezebel. It tells us that when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. Now you can't get anywhere more barren or desolate than the desert. And that's where he ran to. That's where he went, to get away, to make sure that Jezebel could get nowhere near him. He was afraid. He was scared. And it tells us that he came to a broom tree. There in the desert, there was this tree. And he sat down and he prayed. Well, thank God he could still pray. Thank God he still had some faith. But then it tells us his prayer, and he says that he prayed that he might die. Wow. Elijah, this great prophet of God, through whom God had done great things and won many victories, Elijah, at this point in his life, prayed that he might die. And he says, look, Lord, I've had enough. I've had enough, Lord. I wonder, us as children of God, us as Seventh-day Adventists who've been so blessed with a wonderful message, I wonder if sometimes we say, Lord, I've had enough. I can take no more, Lord. It is too much. I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, Elijah said. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down. The record tells us, under the tree and fell asleep. You know, medical people, doctors will tell us that when a person suffers from depression, one thing that they like to do is sleep. Because sleep is a sweet release. It is a way of escape from problems and difficulties. And although it doesn't tell us here in the Bible record, I would like to venture to say that Elijah here was suffering from depression. And he sleeps. I remember quite a few years ago now, I was having Bible studies with this lady, and I remember going round to see her on a Monday evening, as I normally did. And I remember when I was talking to her, I said, well, how was your weekend? How did your weekend go? And she said, Pastor, I've spent the whole weekend sleeping. I went to bed Friday evening, and I didn't get up till Sunday evening. And I said, wow, that's quite a rest. That's a long sleep. And she then began to tell me problems, difficulties in her life. And she said it was so wonderful not to be able to think anymore of all of these challenges in my life, of all of these difficulties that were surmounting and arising and overwhelming me. And she said, in fact, when I woke up on Sunday evening, I felt so disappointed. It's a sad fact, my friends, that many people get so down and depressed, they even take their life. Elijah even said that, didn't he? He said, Lord, take my life. It's better I don't live than have all these problems, than have that woman coming after me who wants to kill me. It's better I know nothing. I've had enough, Lord. Lay down under that tree and fell asleep. Then we notice something amazing happened. It says, all at once, an angel touched him. Wow. This tells me, my friends, that God is always aware of where we are and what we're going through. He knows when we're suffering. He knows when we're going through difficulties. He knows when we have problems. And he doesn't run away, but he comes to meet us. And there was Elijah, under that tree, in a depressed state, running away. But we are told, all at once. It didn't take minutes, it didn't take hours, it didn't take days, but all at once, an angel touched him. Remember, we're trying to answer that question. Does God still speak to his people today? An angel touched him and spoke to him, get up and eat. God was still concerned with the physical necessities of his prophet Elijah. Yes, he was going the wrong way. He was outside of God's will at this time. But God was still concerned for his prophet. And he wanted to attend to his physical needs. And we're told that Elijah, he got up, he looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread, baked over hot coals. There was a jar of water. And he was so grateful, because we are told that he ate and drank. One thing I'd like us to notice, however, there was no word of thanks from Elijah. He just simply ate and drank. And then what did he do? It says he lay down again. He was still depressed. He was still discouraged. And he lay down again, back to sleep. Did God give up on his servant? The next verse tells us that the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him again and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. I want us to pause there for a moment. You notice that the angel came back. God was not giving up on his servant. But what I'd like us to notice is that God was aware that Elijah was about to go on a long journey. But this journey was outside of God's will, because he was still running, still trying to get away. But nevertheless, God still provided for his needs. And here's a truth for us, my friends, that sometimes in our lives, when we take wrong directions, when we go the wrong way, God does not abandon us, but he still attends to his people. He still looks after us. He still nourishes us, encourages us. Get up and eat, for the journey even though the journey is not the way I want you to go, even though it is outside of my will, I'm still going to feed you. I'm still going to look after you. And again, Elijah got up and ate and drank. Notice again, there was no word of thanks from Elijah. But it tells us that he was strengthened by that food, and he travelled 40 days, 40 nights, until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. 40 days and 40 nights, going in the wrong direction, the wrong place. But he reached Horeb, known at that time as the mountain of God. And it tells us that he went into a cave. And that tells us that Elijah was still in a depressed state. Because he wanted to get away, he wanted to go to a place that was dark, that no one knew about, just to escape, just to get away, where no one would see him, no one would bother him, just to get away into a deep, dark cave. I remember recently I was talking to someone, and they had gone through some difficulties in their life. Indeed, they were still going through some difficulties. And he shared with me, and he said, "You know what, Pastor?" He said, "I wish I could go into a deep, dark basement. I wish I could go to a place that was so deep and dark that no one would be able to disturb me, no one would be able to communicate with me. I just want to go to that place." When someone is depressed, they just want to get away. To be far away. Not to be disturbed. And that's where Elijah was. 40 days and 40 nights trying to escape. Then he saw a cave, a place of release, a place where he could hide. Spent the night there. Had God abandoned his servant? Once more, God comes to Elijah. And it says that the word of the Lord came to him, and God said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Notice there was not a word of rebuke. He wasn't told off for what he was doing. But instead, a simple question: "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I wonder sometimes in our lives, God has to ask that question of us. What are you doing here? I want you to be over there. I want you to be in that place. I want you to be doing that in your life, but instead you're over there. What are you doing there? I wonder today if we are in the right place. Sure, we're in church, the place where God wants us to be on the Sabbath. But what about our lives in the rest of the week? Are we in the place where God wants us to be? Or are we going in a different direction? Are we travelling like Elijah did, 40 days and 40 nights, outside of God's will, going in a different direction? What are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah has an answer. And he says, "Look, Lord, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. I've done a lot for you, Lord. Look what has happened in my life. Look at the miracles you have done through me. Look how I've been so willing to follow you and to do your will. I've been zealous for you, Lord. And yet, Lord, you bring this woman upon me, Jezebel, who's trying to take my life. It's not fair, Lord. It's not fair. I've been so trusting of you. I have followed you. I've done a lot for you, Lord, and yet this is where I am. This is what is happening. Lord, it is not fair. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, your own people, Lord, broken down your altars, and have put your prophets to death with the sword. Your own people have rejected you, yet they're not in the same position I am. They haven't got Jezebel coming after them, yet I'm the one who's done so much for you, Lord. It's not fair. It's not fair. I am the only one left. I, Elijah, am the only one who is faithful to you. I am the only one who has covered and done your will. I am the only one who is following you. I am the only one. Of course, that was not true, as you read later on. But in Elijah's mind, it was his perception. And sometimes, my friends, our minds can play tricks on us when we're in a dark place, when we're in the wrong place, when we're discouraged. Why, Lord, are you treating me this way when I've done so much for you? And we are tempted to believe I'm the only one who's faithful to you. I'm the only one who's stood up for you. Everyone else who doesn't seem to be standing up for you, they seem fine. It's not fair. It's not fair. I am the only one left. And now they are trying to kill me too. What a place to be in. What a place for Elijah to be in after all of that, the great victories that have been won through him and how God had used him and a great prophet in Israel. What a place for him to be in this deep, dark cave, wanting to die. But the Lord spoke again. He said, Elijah, go out. Go out of your cave and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that amazing? That in Elijah's deepest and darkest hour, there is a voice from the Lord. And I wonder, my friends, I wonder if sometimes we are tempted to think that I am in such a deep and dark place. Where is the word of the Lord in my life? I need to hear a word from the Lord. I need to know the presence of the Lord. I wonder sometimes if it is just our perception that the Lord is not there. But then something happens. It says that as Elijah, as he stood there, it tells us that some strange things developed. It tells us that there was a great and powerful wind, tearing the mountains apart and shattering the rocks before the Lord. The Lord was working mightily. He was working powerfully. He was providing a miracle, it seemed. And sometimes, are we not tempted to cry out, Lord, I need a miracle in my life. I need something to happen. I need something amazing to take place. I need a miracle, Lord, for you to shake up my life. Here was a miracle. Mountains and rocks shattering. But then, strangely, the Bible tells us the Lord was not in the wind. It wasn't God. He wasn't in that. And it says after that, after the wind, there was an earthquake. Can you imagine an earthquake taking place? was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire. But we are told the Lord was not in the fire. So there was Elijah, waiting for some magnificent demonstration, waiting to see the power of God. And indeed, there was fire, there was earthquake, there was wind, rocks shattering, but God was not in those things. And sometimes, my friend, in our lives, we're calling out for a miracle, we're calling for God to do something, when in actual fact, He already is doing something. And this is where we come to the answer to our question. Does God still speak to His people today? The narrative ends here in verse 12. It says that after all these things, it says, after that, there was a gentle whisper. So God was not in the fire, earthquake, and wind. But where God was in the gentle whisper. And my friends, what happens to us is we're looking for great things. We're looking for tremendous things for God to do for us. When instead, He is in the gentle whisper. The question is, can we hear the gentle whisper? I remember quite a few years ago, I had a problem in my life. It was causing anxiety. And I was and I was praying to God, asking God to relieve me of this stress, take away the problem, but nothing was happening. It seemed that my prayers were just rising up to the ceiling, coming back down again. Where was God? Why wasn't God there? Where was He when I needed Him? Where was God when I was calling out to Him? And I was praying to Him, but I could not. I didn't discern that God was on my side and that God would answer my case. Where was God? Some miracle needed to take place. Something needed to happen before I could get out of this problem, out of this difficulty that was taking place in my life. I remember one day, as I was praying to God and asking Him to relieve me of this, I almost gave up. I said, Lord, I give up praying this prayer. I give up. You're not answering, you're not there, I give up. And I remember just sitting there in the silence. I couldn't even pray. I was so discouraged that I wasn't even praying. But my friends, it was then that God broke through. Something happened. And my mind was directed to the Bible, to Exodus chapter 14. And as I went to this chapter, and I read the familiar story I've read so many times before about the Egyptians coming after the Israelites, and how the Israelites were down by the Red Sea, and how they were stuck there because the Red Sea was too deep, and there's no way they could get through, and behind them were the Egyptians. They were stuck between a rock and a hard place. And then I was directed to Moses who stood up and said, stand still, for today you will see the salvation of the Lord. And my friends, it was like a revelation. Because when I read that, it was like God was saying to me, stand up, stand still, Terry, stand still. Because today you will see the salvation of the Lord. And I want to tell you, friends, that for me, that was God's gentle whisper. And it lifted me. And let me tell you this, the problem didn't go away, but I had peace. I want to say to us today, my friends, that many of us do not have peace because we're not listening to the gentle whisper of God. God is still speaking to His people today. It doesn't matter where we are or where we find ourselves, whether we're under that tree, whether we're in that deep, dark cave. God is trying to break through. And all we need to do is say, Lord, I'm listening. Psalm 46, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. Let me tell you this, my friends, the devil is very clever. Why is he very clever? Because what he's trying to get us to do is to run around, busy in so many things, even in church work, so we do not hear the voice of God. And so sometimes we're tempted to say, God no longer speaks. But let me say this to you today. God is still speaking to his people. It may not be a miracle. It may not be in the wind. It may not be in the earthquake or in the fire. But God is speaking in a gentle whisper. Let us hear for ourselves the word of the Lord today.